Before we get started today, we have a couple of words from Hannah Zevin, the founding editor of Parapraxis magazine and director of the Psychosocial Foundation. Most of you know that Ordinary Unhappiness began as a collaboration with Parapraxis magazine, and I'm delighted to turn things over to Hannah for a few moments to talk about some incredibly exciting work that they're doing over there.
Thanks so much, Abby, and thanks for having us on. You know, you're right. We're announcing and have announced, maybe you've already seen it, that the Psychosocial Foundation has received this incredible gift from a private donor. And now we're opening a therapeutic collective, an education space, and indeed, Parapraxis bookstore in Uptown Oakland. And the gift is incredible. It's going to ensure that we're in the building for 5 years and allow us to do all kinds of work. We have a group of clinicians. We're committed to working in traditions of left psychoanalytic praxis. They'll be doing sliding scale treatment down to free. We have, all that we've done at Psychosocial for the last 5 years now in a place. So while we're, of course, going to keep everything hybrid, we have a very international group of students and thinkers that we work with. We'll now also have a place to gather. And for the real heads, yes, a bookstore that has hundreds of volumes of used out of print and new psychoanalytic books that are, absolutely part and parcel of the traditions we're in conversation with. But although we have this incredible gift, and although we will be in Uptown Oakland for the next 5 years, projects like these that really rely on that twinned pillar of praxis and theory are really labor intensive. They're really time intensive, and time is also money intensive. And so we're here to make an appeal to all of you. We've launched this campaign called the 100 Muriel Gardners campaign. Although some real heads may already know, Muriel Gardner was a double heiress who safeguarded the future of a left psychoanalysis at one of its most perilous hours. She was a psychoanalyst in her own right and saved the lives and livelihoods of many of her comrades. Her story is singular, but actually the history of psychoanalysis is dotted with all kinds of stories of those doing left philanthropic work and becoming very essential to the growth of a radical psychoanalysis in the 20th century. And we argue it remains so. And so we're hoping that you'll join us or forward this to someone you know who might be able to in donating annually for 5 years for the life of this original leadership gift. We've gotten into the building. And now we want to use this space for and towards Oakland and have our clinicians be able to offer all that they can to our community. So you can find us online at psychosocialfoundation.org/donate. If you're local, we'd love for you to come by on September 12th. We're opening our doors on September 8th. And we hope to see you there or, as usual, online.
I know I wasn't on the last episode, and I'm very sad about that. Now that y'all are doing your summer thing, it's nice to see you again over Zoom. Hello.
Hey, Dan.
We missed you.
Yeah, we do miss you.
I know I wasn't there for the Protestant conversation.
In spirit, you were there. Not in flesh.
There were two things that I was like screaming at the timeline when I was editing the last episode that I thought, I wish you'd gone a little bit more into it. One of them is about that the like emergence of purity culture. Like as somebody that grew up peak American Protestant purity culture era, I wanted to drive home like how warped the superego gets, or what would come to be known as the superego in a couple of centuries gets, when it's not only about policing your own morality, it's also about assuming other people's perspectives to in turn police yourself through them. It's like a multi-layered kind of moral policing. I don't know if you guys ever heard that term, like the stumbling block?
Yeah.
It's from the Pauline books.
Yeah, the stone that the builders rejected. Yeah.
I'm familiar.
You leave the house not wanting to be a stumbling block. So for women, it would be like, you don't look at yourself and decide if you're good. You look at yourself and you decide, am I going to cause somebody else to sin by revealing yourself? And so you go out and you assume everybody around you. I know, it's disgusting. You assume everybody around you at a baseline is a pervert, is looking for something to leer at.
As a man.
And then you have to defend against that. No, as a woman, you have to defend against that.
That everyone around you is a man who might be looking at you lustfully. And in this warped logic, it's your fault.
And then it's a man Yeah, there's that whole, there was a term that I was taught when I was growing up, bounce your eyes. And the idea is if you see a girl with like a short skirt on or something like that, learn to bounce your eyes off the legs. So you don't stare at them. You notice them and then bounce your eyes off of it. Don't linger on it.
Where do they bounce to?
I don't know, to heaven, to God, to Jesus on the cross. But what that teaches young men to do, this taught me to do as a kid who believed all this stuff, was
associate Jesus with women's legs.
No, think about it.
Okay.
As a young man,
sorry.
every woman that I see on the street, I don't see as a full-fledged human that I get to interact with. I'm looking her up and down, trying to find what part of her body might cause me to stumble. And then my entire interaction with her is framed around not looking at this thing. This, again, self-policing, telling myself don't be a pervert in a weird way, like kind of turns me into a pervert.
No,
there's something about that experience. It's so wicked and vile. And to hear you guys talk about that, like Lutheran birth of Protestantism and what it does to the mind, like even in, I don't know, the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, that stuff was still like sharp and poisonous and very much alive.
Well, that was the height of a certain manifestation of purity culture.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why they call you Dan True Love Waits Yowl.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. My wife and I are saving ourselves for the afterlife. It's very important.
No, but this is of the same moment as while you were learning to bounce your eyes, in other rooms, your counterparts were learning that they should understand themselves as being like a stick of gum.
Yeah.
And if they were to be chewed, who would then want to chew on them?
My church preferred the pair of socks.
The pair of socks.
You don't want to be a dirty pair of socks.
Is new to me.
This is just fetishism.
Yeah, no, that is true. Is like this, it's just, but I mean, to me, the part that Dan is not saying and maybe didn't experience, but like you are talking about how like in an effort to remain pure, right? You look away from the thing that could turn you on, which also creates a form of objectification. It initiates you surveying women in the mode of objects, but then says, don't do that. Think of Jesus. Think of purity. So it also then, it inevitably fuses the entire, forbidden, titillating experience with God.
Yeah.
It seems like, I don't want to be glib, but like this is prohibition creating desire, right? This also,
that's not glib. That's just true.
Yeah,
just true.
I was going to say that too.
It also,
look, in the psychoanalytic world, people attribute that to Lacan, but you know where that is first? It's in Paul.
Yeah.
I don't remember where. I think it's in 1 Corinthians, but like some version of that. That is straight out of Pauline Christianity. Absolutely. The law creates desire.
There's also something really modern, though, about it. I mean, the Pauline stuff is absolutely there. That's the cradle of it, right? But also Paul is writing for a community that, many of them think like Christ is coming back like any time this year, next year, et cetera. Like, so the questions of like literal sexual reproduction or how you relate to your own sexual desires, like those can be like kind of bracketed, right? Or set aside.
Yeah. Just don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, as Christianity, or the thing that becomes Christianity, matures for 2 millennia, and people do be having more people, and and young people keep going through like puberty and shit, and you have to like subjectivize people into this and socially reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
This produces things like what Dan is describing here, right? Or this kind of what you described as self-policing, right? And policing is a very modern concept too, where it's like you have to track your own self, but also like it's not, I was thinking like the male gaze when you described it, but also it's the male gaze, but it's not a stable single position because you're always looking back at yourself and worried about how other people might be seeing you or how you're supposed to see yourself. And in other words,
that is the male gaze. It's just how women have traditionally been understood to experience it, not men.
Yes, but also the point I'm trying to make is that the position of what is presumably, and it is in many respects, the hierarchical center of this, is also fundamentally anxious and not secure.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, this is a modern self. And that modern self has psychic damage and has psychic work to do all the goddamn time.
Are you saying that Dan bouncing his eyes has a place in, say, Krafft-Ebing's Psychopathia Sexualis?
Well,
what page number would you say Dan is on?
Well, I did find myself looking for Luther in Havelock Ellis. And there is this bit in the Havelock Ellis text from 1899 or 1898 where he mentions trying to like relate religious attitudes to the biological thing that he calls auto-eroticism or auto-erotism. We'll get into it. Where he's like, Luther in his table talk said that basically when young girls start having dreams about sex, and particularly ones that may result in a nocturnal orgasm, which, by the way, in this framework is happening to them on their own.
Wait, are you quoting right now?
I'm about to.
Oh, okay.
Thus, in his table talk, Luther remarks that girls who have such dreams should be married at once, quote, taking the medicine which God has given.
You're listening to Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. Ordinary Unhappiness is completely made possible by the generous support of our Patreon community. We could not make this show, let alone keep it ad-free for all our listeners, without all that our Patreon community does for us. We are incredibly grateful. If you would like to support the show, if you would like to help make psychoanalytic education readily accessible to a wide audience, and also get 2 additional episodes per month, including our journey through Freud's Standard Edition and our takes too spicy to be put in front of the paywall, come find us at patreon.com/ordinaryunhappiness. I'm Abby Kluchin.
I'm Martin Luther. I'm sorry, Patrick Blatchfield.
I'm Danielle.
Wait, if you go to be Martin Luther, I want to be Havelock
I want to be
Ellis.
Calvin.
I want to be Ulrich Zwingli because that guy had a wild fucking
That
life.
guy fucked.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, keep that. Keep it.
I wouldn't mind being Ellis.
How about John Wesley? Anyone want to be Wesley? Or or what about George Fox, the guy who started Quakerism? All right, fine.
No thanks.
Here.
There's nothing fun about Quakerism. I want to be Calvin. I want to tell you where you're going to be in 10 years.
I want to be Friedrich Schleiermacher.
Friedrich
Schleiermacher. Fuck me.
Friedrich Schleiermacher.
Friedrich Schleiermacher.
Schleiermacher.
Whatever.
Schleiermacher, say it into the microphone.
Schleiermacher. And I will say, who gets a shout out in Krafft-Ebing because his description of religious feeling as a type of like ecstasy that is universal, etc. Krafft-Ebing is like, yeah, you know, some people kind of get off on this, or it seems to be kind of related to sex.
Can I say I want to talk about that a little bit because today we're going to talk about sexology.
Yes.
And the thing that I found so refreshing about these texts, especially after wading through the muck
I believe you mean these
of
sexts.
these. Thank you. I'm not going to follow you down that rabbit hole, but that's fine. After all the Protestant reading, where remember like 2 episodes ago, I told you that story about growing up in a church where people weren't allowed to say like, yeah, I work hard. Instead, you have to say, I'm blessed. Right? You have to like dance around a thing because in the back of your mind, if you say these magical incantations, one, it signals something else to the people in the community. I'm blessed actually means God deems me worthy of blessings, which is like kind of like a nice, cool, on me. Nice. Look at me. Be like me. But then there's also this other thing that I've always struggled with, at least when I was growing up in the church, which is that the unspoken thing behind any kind of intellectual pursuit is, does this glorify God? Like, where does God fit into this? Like, you could be studying an animal outside, and it's not about learning about an animal. It's about like
a hippopotamus,
what about this,
for instance?
Yeah. What about this creation can we learn that reflects on God's
Lord.
identity, want for us, glory, right? Everything kind of ropes back to God. Even like if you're doing charitable work, yes, I want to help people in need, but I also want to curry favor with God. I'm doing this not necessarily because I want to help you. I'm doing it because God ordered us to be charitable and to give to the poor. It's not really about helping your fellow man. It's about brownie points of one way or another.
That's cynical, even for you.
Yeah.
I mean, is it? I don't know if it is.
I mean, I didn't grow up in your church or any church, but I do feel like maybe you were supposed to, if you were like currying favor, doing it out of a true intention to help might be better.
Well, I'll just drop this on the floor and we can walk away from it.
Yeah.
Like a metal ball. We'll get there. The church that I grew up in, it was, you were saved by faith, not through works.
Yeah.
Very, very important, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're truly saved, your works will show it.
Right.
So it's not that the works save you, but if you're not saved, or if people want to see you as being saved, then you need to do works to demonstrate your savedness, even though the works haven't saved you. So again, it's that self-policing, it's assuming the mind of the other and performing in order to like fulfill some kind of an image of what they think you are. It's the same whole feedback loop again.
Yeah.
And I'm only saying all this to say, now we get into sexology. Which is like Nietzsche didn't kill God. The sexologists did, or maybe Darwin did, because now God is kind of out of the frame. We don't have this like nibbling at the back of my mind when I read this of like, how does God fit into this? Or what are they doing performatively for each other in the church or to teach about God or to further some kind of like religious agenda? Suddenly it's a very mechanical, scientific, observational. Let's talk about jerking off. There sure is a lot of jerking off. We should kind of see what's behind this as just a behavior.
Yeah.
And I found that so refreshing.
I'm just gonna put a good like 700 pages on all the different ways that you can.
It gave me some ideas. I'm about to go on vacation. I want to try some stuff.
Yeah, I don't think they make sewing machines like that anymore. I really think those are. But
I'll find a way to blame the bicycle.
In Havelock, Ellis, where we learn about how women are turned on by railways, bicycles, and above all, sewing machines. Just wow.
That's
I need
great.
to learn to sew?
I just want the other half of this. Like men like big trucks, right? Wait, hold on. Something is occurring to me here that seems also another way that we can situate sexology and modernity as distinct from like the ancient world, and then with Protestantism as a kind of key pivot point here.
Yeah, a fulcrum.
So Dan, you described, and Abby, you gave other examples too, of how under this type of Reformation Protestant religion, the subject is anxious, right? Or like the characteristic feature of subjectivity is you're constantly looking everywhere, constantly aware of being seen, but like your position as a site of gaze is a little more unstable.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like being an influencer.
Yeah. Now, what's striking to me is that theologically, religiously, there is somebody who sees everything, if you believe. There is an absolute. There is someone whose gaze contains everything, who like, Santa Claus sees when you're sleeping, sees when you're awake, sees when you're masturbating, whatever. And that's God.
Santa Claus sees when you're masturbating?
Oh, yes, he does.
Like Billy Bob Thornton.
But they're not good or bad. They're not good or bad. They're good or naughty. Don't forget.
but like, you follow me here, right? There's something. So on the one hand, there's something very eternal, or at least venerable, about being like, to you, like, yeah, look, God sees everything, right? And I really appreciate your seeing the way in which God has helped me. Now, can you join my affinity scan or something? Right. There is this kind of like, but it is literally, it's invoking this position of absolute sight, right? That ratifies, and we could use the word justifies you. So that's very ancient in some ways. But something that we had in the ancient texts that we looked at, the Christian and Jewish ones, right? Is there kind of narcissism from God? Where God's like, it's all about me. God is a narcissist. He wants all this praise, right? He wants us looking at him and affirming him, and we shouldn't question him because then he'll bring in the hippopotamus, right? Like there's this kind of like, it's all about him.
Yeah.
In the modern mode, even among the people who are invoking how God has blessed you or hashtag blessed you, the narcissism is it's not coming from God anymore. It's about shoring up you.
Yeah.
Right. As a person. And I don't think we'd be wrong to take that kind of fundamentalism, right? A return to this like invoking of the old biblical thing when really what you're doing is like, yeah, I was very successful. I have a jet ski ownership. I swing, but God has forgiven me. I swing again next weekend. God will forgive me afterward. Like this type of that type of narcissism. That is equally a product of modernity or equally something you find in modernity. Two people for whom the position of absolute, of the objective, of something, if not someone that sees everything, is science, right?
Yes.
I am this type of person sexually. It's not a sin. There are other people like me. And in fact, part of what's so remarkable about these sexological texts, even in the ways that they may strike us today as regressive and homophobic, etc., is that some of the people reading these texts, which were bestsellers, would see themselves in them and literally, and the language is very striking, see it as a type of justification. I thought I was alone, I was freakish, I was sick, etc. But no, I'm a type of person who is in this textbook.
Yeah.
Or like science sees me and can contain me where God rejected me and made me hate myself.
Okay, so time out for a second. Before we go any further, can we offer up a little bit of a sense of what we mean when we're talking about sexology? I think that would be really helpful in orienting our listeners before we get specifically into a series of texts. Patrick, what's sexology?
Let's talk about sexology, baby. So on one level, we love a thing that says what it is. The ology on the end of something means it's a systematic study of something, right? This is a discipline. It's an orientation. It is a discursive tradition of research and inquiry.
Yeah.
Right? And if someone were to introduce themselves to you as a sexologist, well, I mean, you might think a lot of weird things.
You'd shake their hand.
Yeah.
And then wash your hands.
Maybe, yeah. But like, okay, that's a type of psychologist, right? Or that's somebody who does this thing in a modern department, or that's somebody who does sex education or something, right? And in some ways, this thing that we call sexology is what gives us some of these more modern formations. Like there's stuff that's happening in sexology now that might happen in a gender studies program or in public health or in sex education or in psychology, et cetera, right?
Yeah, well, we have a thing called sexuality studies now.
Exactly.
That is a much more modern invention than even sexology. Can you situate us in time? Because it does seem like all of a sudden there are all of these writers, not least of them Freud, who are starting to do this sort of scientific study of text. So like, when are we in time, and where does this discourse come from? Like, where are we seeing it?
So we may recall that we left off last time in the 18th century, in this sort of Enlightenment era, Mary Wollstonecraft being like, women, we exist. We're a category of person. We have certain experiences. We face certain systems of institutional oppression, et cetera. There are other things that are going on there, of course, but like there is a appeal for recognition and for singularity of voice. By the time we arrive at the 19th century, and particularly the late 19th century, and as all these things that we tracked in their incipients in the Protestant era and in the early modern era, from the state to medical bureaucracies to even like discourses of talking about sex in print, have grown in scale and scope and been thoroughly secularized, at least on the level of, well, thanks to Darwin, understanding themselves as opposed to or trying to account for things that would otherwise have been dealt with by religion or by like the Inquisition, etc. So you've got people from different orientations, so to speak, which I mean, like they're coming at it from different places.
You mean like disciplinary orientations?
Yeah, like people who are medical doctors, people who are sometimes they're called alienists. In fact, that's alienism is one of the is the name of the journal that Havelock Ellis writes this in. But like literally lawyers, judges, people being like, well, what do we do with a rapist, right? Or why is this person doing this? Or anthropologists who are going elsewhere in the colonial world being like, people have these other behaviors here, right? We have to find some other way of accounting for it, or they want to systematize it in a way that isn't like God made some people into demons or sex is a universal sin in this way. It's like, let's take a step back, systematically think about this stuff and produce archives.
But so all of these people aren't necessarily what we would think of today as scientists, right? This is also very much in the realm of social science. I mean, that does seem important, that this isn't all just coming from medicine or public health, that it does include anthropology, and that, some of what we'll get to this, but one of the most interesting features to my mind from like a literary critical perspective, looking at some of these texts, is that they are taxonomies, which also, Dan earlier brought up Darwin, but you might want to think about like Linnaeus, right? So there's a systematizing impulse here, which is a very 19th century kind of thing. Let's tackle this thing. Let's try to encompass it in all of its weirdness and all of its like most outlying cases as well as its most typical cases. But like, let's in some way master it by collecting all of these cases and then figuring out where do they go. Let's make up some categories and figure out from those, extrapolating from those individual idiosyncratic cases, how do we place this into a broader and, if possible, might not be possible, but if possible, exhaustive framework. And this also is going to include, and here I think about Linnaeus again, also making, literally naming, the sort of like the Linnaean system with the Latin names, is coming up with an incredible amount of vocabulary, which I think is so vital here because, look, people don't read Havelock, Ellis, and Krafft-Ebing that often now, but we use so much of the language that they literally coined, that they invented.
In some ways, we could even say that the discipline of sexology, or this let's call it a discursive tradition or community of people.
That's a better way of putting it, I think. A discursive tradition.
Is basically at the ground zero of creating this thing that we now call sexuality or sex in the fully modern sense of it. We may not know what that actually means, right? But think about, well, it's something people do with certain parts of their body. There's certain types of people. There's certain, there are categories on Pornhub that are like, you can navigate, right? This sort of sense that this is a domain of things, which previously...
Krafft-Ebing would have loved Pornhub.
Oh, God, yeah. But
not morally, but as a research tool.
So now that like God is out of the picture and Darwin has entered the picture, and also we have a robust understanding of the complexities and the variation of human social arrangements, let's think about this thing called sex or sexuality in a biological mode, yes, but also as like a force or a drive or something that everybody does, but that has different types of expression on the individual level, on the collective level, et cetera. And we're going to kind of try and figure out what are the basic structures? How do people turn out in certain ways? What also, though, and this is where it's a little bit different from what we might call a modern program, how do we prevent certain types of things that we don't like? How do we shape certain types of things? How do we treat people who we deem are broken by this, et cetera? And it's very old and in some ways very retrograde, but it also produces how we talk about things now.
I want to just make one quick caveat, which is to say that if you were going to make a list of like key players in this discourse of sexology, Freud is among them. We are not getting to Freud today. We're a little bit earlier. And in our next episode, we are going to get to Freud. But just to be clear that if you were going to go and do some reading here, Freud, particularly in his 1905 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, is absolutely part and parcel of this tradition.
And I think it's also worth saying here that this discourse, right, of sexology is not just an academic thing, or rather, it's not just academics or professionals in various institutions trying to create something or writing just for themselves. And that's why this is also really significant. Books like Krafft-Ebing's Psychopathia Sexualis, right, which is going to be a very pathologizing text. It's literally in the title. We're going to talk about all these kinds of people, et cetera. Or Havelock Ellis's books about the varieties of sort of human sexual expression, et cetera. Studies in the psychology of sex are bestsellers. People love to read this. People really want to read it. And that also extends to Freud too, right? People want to read Freud because they want to read sex stuff. And some of that we could call prurient, I guess. Like people really, I don't know, the way boomers might have gone to the library to find copies of National Geographic because they had topless people in them. Yep. Right? It's like, I'm going to find this stuff. And believe me.
It's naughty. It's titillating. Yeah.
Yeah. Like literally or figuratively.
Voyeuristic.
Like, yeah. And you can get the sense And we will find when we read later Freud that he's going to have patients or know people who have read Ellis or Krafft-Ebing or the Italians who are also sexologists. Like these texts are out there. And hell, sometimes you can even find them now, like so printed by like erotica publishers and also by academic presses, right? So there's always that element.
That's such an interesting, I don't know, just lingering with that, like the way that the compendium of like all of the different ways that people can be sexual is, it springs from the scientific impulse nominally, but the function it can also, as you said before, can be one, recognition to seek out, do I find myself in here? Are there other people like me? Which is in itself yet another impulse from, oh, I'm gonna look at this because I'm gonna find the ways that people experience sexual desire and sexual pleasure in like quote unquote non-traditional ways. Titillating.
Yeah. We could even put those things together and say they're two sides of the same coin, right? The scientists are interested in this stuff. Like it becomes a issue of scientific salience for them.
It makes you look differently at the phrase scientific curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because it's, well, you were saying it's two sides of the same coin, but it's all curiosity.
Yeah. And it's curiosity too, though. The scientists are interested in it, in exploring and kind of creating this object that we call sex, right? In the modern sense. But everyday people are also interested in what the scientists are doing because they have many of the same like prompts for being interested in this stuff that the scientists do. And to put that in terms of what we've been talking about in the Narcissism series so far, imagine how different this world is where you can get mass-produced printings of books, where you are living in a city where there is industrial change, where families are living together, but they're also, you're seeing new fashions, you're getting mass media, you are encountering other types of people, encountering variety, and the authority of discourses that would just be religious, that's no longer satisfying, right? You can't just be like, oh, these people are all sinners. Some people will be like, these people are all sinners. Like that doesn't necessarily speak to the fact that, I don't know, your next door neighbor does this, or you saw someone doing that, etc. But also, and even more so than that, there were ways in which the theological and moralizing discourses couldn't or wouldn't say certain things, right? They couldn't speak to certain things. Mark Jordan, the historian of sexuality, has some great stuff about this where, well, we all think we know what this word called sodomy is, like the law defines it in certain ways, right? And it's certainly the case that in the medieval era, tons of monks were really worried about sodomy. Like people were writing about how it's a sin. But also, whenever they write about it, like, we can't really define what it is because then people will do it.
Right.
And in fact, if you start trying to figure out what these monks think sodomy is, sometimes you're like, yeah, this guy was committing sodomy on his own. Like, well, what is that? Sometimes maybe it's masturbation. Sometimes it's certain types of sex. You never really know. So like literally the object, it's invoked as this sort of phobic object. It's this thing that's there. It's like a demon or something, but also we can't say too much about it.
Yeah, because other people might do it.
Exactly. But now in the modern world, much more literacy, but also like people have different relations to one another intimately, but also they have much more privacy in some ways. Here comes a discourse, or there's a need for a discourse. It's like, this is what people do in private. This is what other people are doing, right? It's a whole other, in other words, way of thinking about this domain of human activity that also reflects a new way of like being a subject and being in a community. The idea of having a sex life, that's not something a monk would have had. In many senses, not even if they were fucking, you're like, I don't know what that means. What's a sex life?
This is, for instance, like, the famous Foucault line about how the quote unquote homosexual is a 19th century invention. Like that's a perfect example of what you're talking about.
I feel like what we're describing is there's like a domino effect of like permissions given. Where it starts with Darwin being like, maybe we can explain things without having to appeal to the divine. Or maybe there's like, it's not even that we have to cut God out, but maybe you can get a little farther if we assume certain materialist baselines as we move forward. And then that gives permission to these sexologists to be like, okay, well, if we're animals, or if we choose to think of ourselves as animals, then we should be studying all of our behaviors, which then gives permission to a popular like reading audience to be like, well, if they're going to write this stuff, I've been looking to the Bible to explain my symptoms for a long time, and I feel bad. Like it makes me feel bad. I don't like the way this makes me feel. But here I can find a term that describes me. And I feel like, I mean, we do a psychoanalytic podcast. How many times have we fielded the question, what does it mean to be diagnosed?
Yeah.
What is the feeling when I'm told I am this way? Like, is that actually good for me? Because it makes me feel a way that's like fresh and new and interesting. I can understand myself better. Here's an audience, the concept of a sex life. The idea of knowing, oh, I'm what they call a chronic masturbator. That's new. I didn't know that. Like, I could just see that. I could see that, like, it starts with Darwin and it goes to somebody realizing something very deeply intimate about themselves in a way that doesn't make them feel like shit.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. I don't know. That's cool.
I mean, look, this gets at a core paradox here. And also something that I want us to make sure we're all on the same page, the three of us, our listeners, as we get into this material, right? Which is that on the one hand, there is liberatory, let's call it progressive, emancipatory, good stuff in this.
Absolutely.
Right? Instead of being a sinner and a sodomite, you're like, oh, no, I'm an invert in this particular way, right? Or hell, Havelock Ellis talk about Misert's research is like, I'm really into watching women urinate. I'm going to call this undinism after like the undine, like a mermaid type shit, right? Like there is something in that's like, okay, I'm not being condemned and lumped away by the good book. I'm in this medical book. This isn't a bad thing. Right?
Didn't he also put his wife as one of the case studies?
Yeah, she's in. It's a question about how again, that the scientists are trying to understand things that are going on with them too, right?
Sorry, while we're doing Havelock Ellis trivia, my greatest realization here was that he slept with Margaret Sanger.
Yeah,
incredible.
No, that's the eugenics movement too. Like eugenics isn't a science anymore. Like, oh, this is not a science. It never was. But it emerges from this similar thing. We're going to think about people like animals and what are the traits, and maybe we want to fuck with those traits. Like again, it's very modern in that way. So one, there's this progressive, sympathetic thing, Dan, you're right. You're no longer going to go to hell because you masturbate. Now, that doesn't also mean that there isn't bonkers shit in here, right? Some of these people are like...
mad stuff in this.
So you're not going to hell because you masturbate. You're just probably going to die of a nervous disorder when you're 20 because the masturbation is sapping your like vital essence, right?
Yeah,
like there's got to be... Or the homophobia, et cetera. Like sometimes it's like, yes, we've determined you are not a sinner. You are an onanist. And that means, well, in some cases, fuck, they even castrate people, right? Like repressive impulses and programs of social control that are bad. This is not a solution. Those dynamics can play out here too, right?
Yeah.
But
you could say labels are boxes, and some of those boxes are way more heinous and rigid than others.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
Exactly. But the interesting thing, the thing that is, I think, revolutionary about this stuff is the descriptive impulse, the labeling, trying to think about systematic ways of labeling that at least the people doing it think are neutral.
Yeah.
Without appealing to divine, right? Talking about things like, well, how does this person suffer? Like, what does this do? Are they hurting other people? Are they hurting themselves, et cetera? Like, how might the law be changed, right? Sometimes that even involves a critique of religion, of those repressive forces in that moment, right? So as we get into as you read anything about bisexologists or think about sexology, right? On the one hand, in the modern moment, like, oh, this is really pathologizing, right? I feel stigmatized. I'm made to feel bad about who I am in this sense by reading this text. And sure, that I'm not going to gainsay that. That's true. It's also the case, though, that this is understood by the people doing it as not being stigmatizing or as being diagnostic of medical issues or social problems, etc., in a way that isn't the same thing as the stigma of sin, of guilt, of God.
Okay, I think it would be helpful for our listeners to hear, first of all, just a sense of like, what does the table of contents look like? Because that can be anything from like, and here I'm looking at, the first section of it, like idealization of first love, true love, sentimentality, platonic love, love and friendship, difference between the love of the man and that of the woman, celibacy, adultery, et cetera, et cetera. And then, and this is, I should have said, this is from 1886. Okay, and now moving on to the section on pathology, or general pathology. This is going to start in what seems like Freudian territory. Sexual instinct in early childhood, sexual instinct reappearing in old age, sexual perversion in seniles due to impotence or dementia, paresthesia or perversion of the sexual instinct, perversion and perversity, sadism, an attempted explanation of sadism, sadistic lust murder, anthropophagy, mutilation of corpses, maltreatment of women by cutting or flogging, etc., defilement of female persons, symbolic sadism, ideal sadism, sadism practiced on any other object, flogging of boys. I could move on to fetishism, cases in which the fetish is a part of the female body, hand fetishism, bodily defects as fetish is, hair fetishism, hair despoilers. The fetish is a part of female attire. The fetish consists of some special fabric. Now we're fur, silk, velvet, gloves, roses. Beast fetishism. We really got into some like some of Luther's bête noirs. See what I did there?
Yeah. Making beast backs. Yeah.
But okay, so that gives you a flavor, and I think it does hit you when you read it all together. But now let me give you a couple of examples, and I'll pick two that are. This is case 123 and case 124. So you can see how side by side we get. Something that I suppose today we might call a fetish or a paraphilia, but it's going to seem incredibly sweet. And then we're going to do beast fetishism. Okay. They are literally cheek by jowl in this. Well, actually, I guess that's a metaphor, but you know what I mean. They're next to each other in this text. Case 123, B, 30 years of age, apparently untainted, refined, and sensitive. Great lover of flowers, liked to kiss them, but without any sensual motive or sensual excitement, rather of frigid nature, did not before 21 practice onanism and subsequently only at periods. When 21, he was introduced to a young lady who wore some large roses on her bosom. Ever since then, large roses dominated over his sexual feelings. He incessantly bought roses. Kissing them would produce erection. He took them to bed with him, although he never touched his genitals with them. His pollutions henceforth were accompanied by dreams of roses. He would dream of roses of fairy-like beauty and, inhaling their fragrance, have ejaculation. He became secretly engaged to his Lady of Roses, but the platonic relations grew colder, and when the engagement was broken off, the rose fetishism suddenly and permanently disappeared. It never returned, even when he became again engaged after a long spell of melancholia. Kind of lovely, right?
Yeah, it's actually kind of tragic. It's a little bit of a tragic story.
It's got a kind of like Proustian, like the love between the wasp and the orchid. It's like, wow, this is just totally, I mean, I think the guy like also like dies of like TB with like 20 years. Like it's something. I think Deleuze may even cite this one, or if he doesn't, he should. Like, it's like, here's like, look how wild human sexuality is.
Okay, right after this, I'm not skipping. Like there's a citation, but then is beast fetishism. In close relation to stuff fetishism, like the roses are kind of stuff, certain cases must be considered in which beasts exercise an aphrodisiacal influence over human beings. One feels tempted to call it animal eroticism. This perversion seems to be rooted in a fetishism, the object of which is the skin of the beast. The transmitting medium of this fetishism may perhaps be found in a peculiar idiosyncrasy of the tactile nerves, which, by touching furs or animal skins, produces peculiar and lustful emotions, analogous to hair, braid, velvet, and silk fetishism. This may perhaps also explain that peculiar hobby for cats and dogs at times met with in sexually perverted persons.
Cat
The
Fancy.
following case, Cat Fancy magazine. The following case coming under my personal observation seems to favor this assumption. Let me read this case study. Otherwise, you won't get your fancy feast. Case Case 124, zoophilia erotica, animal eroticism, fetishism. Mr. NN, 21 years of age, from a neuropathically tainted family, himself congenitally neuropathic. Even as a child, he often felt impelled to perform at times quite indifferent actions for fear of encountering some untoward event. He learned easily, never had a severe illness, and early a great love for domestic animals, especially dogs and cats, because when petting them, he experienced lustful emotions. For years, he indulged in this play with animals, which sensually stimulated him, although in an innocent fashion, as it were. When he arrived at the age of puberty, he recognized the immorality of his acts and tried to free himself from the habit. He succeeded in this, but henceforth he was troubled in his dreams by such situations, which produced pollutions. He then began onanism. At first, he practiced it by manipulation, accompanied by the idea that he was petting and stroking animals. After some time, he arrived at psychical onanism, produced by vividly imagining such situations and accompanied by orgasm and ejaculation. This made him neurasthenic. He claimed that sodomitic ideas never entered his mind, that the sex of the animals never influenced his fancies or actions. In fact, he had given it no thought. He never had homosexual instinct, but heterosexual desires were not foreign to him. Though he had never indulged in coitus because of want of libido, from masturbation and neurasthenia, and from fear of infection, he was drawn only to women of lithe figure and with a proud gait. I can keep going on here. Let's see. All right. Patient was of slight build and anemic. He was greatly concerned to know whether his lost virility could be restored, as this would raise his waning self-esteem. All right.
You know what? Okay. I guess we could just, I'll just say this is really funny. I mean, it's really funny. It's like I can't help it here. Like both these stories kind of paint a really vivid picture of like people who are like severely unfulfilled.
Yeah.
They both have some kind of a lack going on, especially the roses guy. It's like he was in love with the idea of having this partner. And then the day he got his partner, it all fell apart. Which is kind of like weirdly Lacanian to me.
Yeah.
But the second one about the bestiality.
It's literally Beauty and the Beast, the whole thing.
Well, no, the thing that I hate to keep bringing this back to God. I'm so sorry.
No, right.
Like in hearing these descriptions, I feel like were this written 200 years earlier, it would have been the devil tormenting him with thoughts or whatever. Yes. And here the author is attributing all of these fantasies to prior life's experiences, to perceived mental shortcomings.
Yes.
Like there's a causal chain being built that leads to a sexual expression as fulfilling some kind of a need.
Yes.
There's logic.
It seems
Absolutely.
so novel.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this is such an important distinction to hit on, right? And let's be really explicit about it. On the one hand, this is strenuously scientific, godless, diagnostic, and understands itself to be doing, again, a systematic account of cases and varieties.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as in-depth as the Freudian case history. Right? There's nothing quite as, it's not that genre.
No.
Right? It is the thing that you
No,
just
it's
gave.
a list of case after case after case.
And I think the Krafft-Ebing different editions, by the timing he dies,
He keeps adding.
He's hundreds of, like, really, here's this guy. Check out this guy I just found. Check out this lady I just found, etc. Right? Clearly, there's also a stigmatizing element, or at least there is an element of moral anxiety or moral concern to this that, we read now as being, well, calling an ejaculation a pollution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even uses the word perversion, right? And note, there's a tension here, as we've said, because Krafft-Ebing, among other things, will be like, well, actually, sometimes the religious fervor and the righteousness of people will be kind of sexualized, or that's a place where sex goes. Or as we'll see with Havelock Ellis, he has examples of like, there's this weird preacher I know who says that when he gives confessions to people, he has orgasms without touching anybody, but that's God. And maybe actually that's a sex thing, right? But so
There's a couple lines in there where it's like, also the ejaculation's very weak. It's only like a couple of drops.
Yeah. and Ellis is very interested
Somehow
in
I retained that.
There's an
from all
American
this
new
reading.
religious movement he's very interested in, where like this Messiah guy is like, eventually the women in my new church start having pleasure in their womb, but it's God, right? And like clearly we're describing some kind of like orgasm, sex, like who knows, right? But like, so there's a criticism of religion, but there's also a kind of stigmatizing, moralizing language that's still here. That's true. Put a pin in that for 1 second though, right? The moral existential fables or anxieties about pleasure and how other people pair or don't. This is diagnostic, scientific. You can talk to your doctor about this, right? And it's cool. You'd be like, yeah, doctor,
if you've had an erection from roses for more than 4 hours, you should probably consult your doctor.
Yeah, and thankfully your doctor isn't like, wait, are you telling me you masturbate? Shit, you're going to hell, buddy. Like they're trying to not do that. Also, though, clearly they're using language. They have Victorian social mores, etc. There are anxieties there. And some of that, we could say, speaks to anxieties that were previously spoken to religion, but that now we're finding, well, like the repressed, they're returning in scientific discourse.
And the attitudes of all of these folks are not the same. That's just something that's probably helpful to get out. Is like, it's not like sexology is a discipline that speaks with one voice.
And that gets to the crucial point of how different figures over the history of sexology and in different places are coming at the problem with different populations in mind and with different like objectives. So Krafft-Ebing, this author who is writing in a medical mode, is also very, very interested in what we might now, is also very invested in the law and in what we might now call forensic psychiatry. And so he's working with like police blotters and people who are put in institutions or who go to trial. And he's interested in what we might call like mens rea. You're like, well, if this person seems compelled to continually expose themselves, maybe we shouldn't treat them as the same as a person who, does a bank robbery. Maybe this is a medical problem. And so what that means is that the people that he's studying, like the cases that come to his attention, are people who are showing up in the docket or are being arrested or who are already in asylums. So a lot of these data are like, well, here are these people who keep compulsively masturbating while they are confined in an insane asylum. Right? There's a real emphasis on that as like a demographic thing that he's studying, but also there's a reason why so much of the text is devoted to rape, to the sexual abuse of children, etc. Like he wants to try and understand where does this come from? How does society deal with this? And how do these quintessentially modern institutions of psychiatry, of incarceration, the law, how do we deal with this in a way that's rational?
I hear you talking a lot about like deviations from normalcy, like identifying and categorizing deviations from normalcy. And I'm a little bit curious how they would articulate their baseline.
Yeah.
And how that articulation of their baseline would...
Yeah,
right. But what is normal then? And how, I don't know, dude, but I hear what you're putting down and I agree. It's all there. I can't help but like kind of wince a little bit at like, okay, so what does it mean to be abnormal? What does it mean to be normal? Where are these definitions coming from? It still feels religiously tinged.
Well, you're right. And and you're really dialed in. But what I really need us to do first, that's so fucking right. What the impulse that we previously identified with religion is still here somehow, but it's not religious.
Right.
Now that, in fact, it's even critical of religion. And it's like reference point, like where it's getting the data is not the confessional, right, or the town square, but interviews in prisons and grand rounds in asylums. Notably it's not doing psychotherapy. This is different from the case histories of Freud's kids. So
right.
Another way of kind of like thinking about this. So if Krafft-Ebing is coming at this from a forensic, legal, criminal justice perspective, right? And this is already, he's also alive to other reasons why people are coming to this, and which are present even in this text too. For example, there's a real concern with syphilis, with venereal diseases, what we might call public health. This is also part of the era where we get a lot of the first attempts to systematize and teach people about contraception. And if you want a way to think about this sort of on its own terms before we critique it, there is a fundamental historical linkage between prophylaxis, contraception, sex education, and eugenics too.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, as kind of distilled in the figure who I invoked before of Margaret Sanger.
And sometimes that's so like the progressive thing, people should be able to have sex because sex is great, but they don't necessarily want to burden them with kids. In this era, that can also go hand in hand with being like, we just need fewer sort of troglodytic Slavs or some shit, right? The racism is there. It's all there.
Yeah.
And If anything, the fact that they use the word fetish from this colonial anthropological gaze is a tell. And people who have been with us for the standard edition episodes where we tracked Freud getting away from Charcot or Breuer may notice some of the data points that Krafft-Ebing gives here that seem to be self-evident to him. Like, this is the gait. This is how this person walks. Was there a hereditary taint, etc.? Like, it's really that type of like Darwinist style thinking about heredity and anxieties about contagion from viruses, diseases, etc. And that also, that ickiness that we feel about like the, religion, as I think we both are, as I think we can be sensitive, like oftentimes really is into pathologizing people of certain sexualities as abnormal, as deviant, right?
Yeah. Yep.
If you're, Krafft-Ebing has other prescriptions about, well, from his perspective, same-sex attraction is pathological and bad. It causes suffering. It's a deviation, etc. We'll talk more about what that means for the norm, but what he really wants to get in like a policy mode is like, how do we deal with people who seem to be stuck as gay, basically? Yeah. And how do we also, we don't necessarily want to hate them, but we want less of them, right? Again, if you're hearing echoes too, to also like transphobic discourses now, like that's also there too, religious and medical, right? But here, for example, so here's him talking about how you should raise your kids to avoid their becoming gay.
This is Krafft-Ebing.
Yes. Neither should a child with antipathic sexual instincts, so potentially disposed to being gay for our purposes, or same-sex homosexual, be placed under the isolated tuition of a tutor or a private master, for frequently the first object of homosexual love is the instructor at home. Care should be taken, too, that tainted children are not caressed and fondled by persons of the same sex. So maybe they could be caressed and fondled by others. I don't know, but dad, don't touch your son. Mom, don't touch your daughter. And beating on the buttocks should never be permitted. It's like, no, like, this is a very different vision of how discipline, maybe beat them in some other way, right? But like, clearly, like, this is public health stuff, right? This it's not Dr. Spock, it's Dr. Krafft-Ebing trying to normalize it, right? He's trying to intervene to prevent.
It's not Winnicott, it's Losicott.
Yeah. And we're going to, and for a lot of Freud's professional career is going to be made by working with people who are really fucked up by this. Like, the case of Judge Schreber comes to mind in particular. Like, people are building weird devices to put their kids in to stop them from masturbating or to prevent like beating them because they're too close to their friend. Like all this stuff, gross shit, right?
I mean, laughing is a luxury. We get to look back and say it's silly, but all of this is written on piles of corpses.
Yeah.
Piles of corpses.
Yes. And I mean, less distressing than what Dan is saying, but still, something that's worth noting is that like all of this in a way that really doesn't depart from what we were talking about last time with Protestantism is anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Dan put his finger on like the question of like part of this anxiety is about the relation to the normal and whether it's possible to establish something as normal. And of course there are all sorts of tacit, generally unstated norms here, right? What does Krafft-Ebing call being gay again? What's
it's inversion or an antipathic disposition.
Where he talks the antipathic sexual disposition, right? Is it would not need to be named as such, except if it were not that the object is incorrect in some sort of way. There is a norm, but it's generally an unmarked norm. And one of the ways it's marked is the entries in this book are created and defined in contradistinction to it.
And with a twist that gets at the like both conceptual anxiety, but the moral hesitation that we have correctly all expressed in different ways. It's precisely when these people, these sexologists, really start being scientifically rigorous and testing their basic assumptions, but start thinking about the norm, that the norm itself gets ever more anxious and it's not actually as comfortable or as clear as you might think.
Right.
So, for example, literally a paragraph or two after Krafft-Ebing talks about the problem of lust murder, right? Like, I don't know, like the 19th century version of internet red rooms and snuff films, right? He then goes on to say this. Cunnilingus and fellatio, parentheses, placing the penis in the mouth of a woman, cunnilingus, I guess, did not need the gloss, have thus far...
Or maybe he thinks that that's also what cunnilingus is.
Well, he does have philatores as a like it's really things that you have not seen since Roman graffiti in Pompeii are coming back here. Yeah. Cunnilingus and fellatio have not thus far been shown to depend upon psychopathological conditions. Now, here we go. These horrible sexual acts seem to be committed only by sensual men who become satiated or impotent from excessive indulgence in the normal way. Placing the penis in the mouth of a woman does not seem to be psychopathic, but rather a practice of married men of low morality.
I'm always saying that.
Who wish to prevent pregnancy and of satiated cynics in non-marital sexual indulgence.
If they were satiated, why would they need to put their dick in someone's mouth?
No, they are no longer satiated. They're jaded, right? They're seeking that next exotic. Yeah. Freud, by the way, says this too, where and also like it's so horrible. Like, okay, like there's an acknowledgement here.
Protesting too much comes to mind.
The people who are not winding up in the asylums or the courts are probably doing things that
are on this list.
Or the things that are, this list is, again, these people aren't fools, right? Clearly, they think raping and murdering children is in another moral universe and legal problem.
Yeah.
Than whether or
like
not,
masturbating to roses.
Yeah.
I mean, he's painting a slippery slope. He's saying like, you wouldn't do this, but like you wouldn't steal a car, but you would download a movie, right? Isn't it that kind of logic?
Yeah, I'd download a car if I fucking could. But it's
that's sort of the cunnilingus of our age.
I mean, that's what he's doing.
But I'm sorry.
So even as we're building this kind of negative, call it like a dialectic of naming, these are the things that are bad, these are the things that are abnormal, etc. If we're rigorous about thinking in terms of structures of psychological development, or even just like being like, well, the selection bias of the fact that a lot of the people I'm dealing with are like taking their penises out in public, but maybe the people who are taking their penises out in private, right? They're not coming into my gaze. The normal itself, even for a guy like Krafft-Ebing, starts to get a little denatured, uncanny.
Yeah.
And that starts to implicate things that go beyond the courtroom, that go beyond the textbook, and that start to disquiet some of our most elemental narrative understandings about what people are like, or like forces of human connection and life. Abby, you found this amazing quote to that effect.
Oh, from Krafft-Ebing?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is a huge text. Like, I mean, I'm looking at it as a PDF and it's 834 pages. So like, I didn't read it cover to cover. Given that, as I have always learned it, Krafft-Ebing compared to someone who we're going to get to soon, like Havelock Ellis, is much more explicitly moralizing. I was interested to see that there is also all of this language of love that shows up early on, where he kind of, and who knows to what extent this is paying, lip service to something or other, or, he's using this to get away with something. But I don't know. The vision of love, or what passes for a motivating force to undertake all of these sorts of actions, whether they're ones that, he's clearly condemning, like, lust murder, or, harming children sexually, right? Or just things that are kind of outside of the norm. It does seem to come from this vision of love as like something that is a true force of nature. Maybe even, I was thinking almost like the Kantian sublime, right? Like a terror to behold. This is a little bit from the preface to the first edition of Psychopathia Sexualis. Quote, "Love unbridled is a volcano that burns down and lays waste all around it. It is an abyss that devours all, honor, substance, and health." Here we go. Also, life is a never-ceasing duel between the animal instinct and morality. Only willpower and a strong character
can emancipate man from the meanness of his corrupt nature and teach him how to enjoy the pure pleasures of love and pluck the noble fruits of earthly existence. I mean, that actually could be out of Luther or Calvin.
So like, this is theological language. It speaks to existential concerns. I mean, and hell, it's not just 19th century or even like invoking Luther. You could imagine someone today being like, how want these things, but also I feel bad about wanting them. How am I monogamous? How am I not monogamous? Like you have these are lived concerns with a full kind of drama and hormonal intensity that humans bring to these problems.
It reminds me of a constant refrain I heard growing up that sex is like fire. In the fireplace, it's warming and it brings joy to your hearth. But if you're not careful, it'll leak out of the fireplace and burn your entire house down. There's that it's love is dangerous. There's an edge to this. Don't be careful what you do. It can destroy you. That kind of a thing.
So how do we build the whole child out of asbestos, basically? Right? How do we prevent that? But another way of saying this, right, is that what these people are discovering, as the famous saying goes, every generation seems to discover this, is that sex is a problem.
Yeah.
It's not given, it's made, it has to be negotiated. So this is, again, case in point, it's moralizing, it's also not moralizing. It is about the abnormal, but then it makes us question the normal, right? These are contradictions that a figure like Krafft-Ebing doesn't necessarily reconcile. But what he does do, and what a lot of sexologists do, and which is why we're reading the sexologists in the beginning, is they mine Western culture to name isms, to name types of guys who represent particular types of scenarios or characterological types, characters who represent or embody some sort of principle of, some sort of way of doing sex and having sexuality. We've already gotten a couple of them. Onan, right? Onanism, the guy from the Old Testament who spills his seed on the ground. I actually had to remind myself about that guy. Actually, I was really curious. Dan, did you get a lot of Onanism talk?
When I was growing up, no.
Yeah.
He was breezed past. And the only time I was taught that story was when I was a teenager, and it was about the importance of purity and not masturbating because semen was children. So if you jerk off,
every sperm is sacred.
Yeah.
It's like abortion into your tissue, kind of a thing.
This
or sock if you're that type.
This is neither here nor there, but Aleister Crowley, the Victorian occultist and magician, has some line which is really driven conspiracy theorist nuts, so to speak, where he's like, you must murder children. You must murder children constantly. I have murdered children 3 times a day for decades. And he means jerking off.
Yeah, he means jerking off.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. And Crowley represents a type, but Onan, a type. Onanism. It's some sort of unhealthy masturbatory practice. And we got a couple other guys who are more literary in their orientation. Another guy, sadism, from
Marquis de Sade. Yeah.
Enjoying some sort of fear. It's whipping or physical violence. There's some sort of...
The infliction of pain.
Yeah.
This is the key thing.
And if you read Sade, talk about another 18th century figure alongside Wollstonecraft, a lot of his texts are literally just schematizations of taxonomies of things he'd like to see or ways people are getting fucked. And we have masochism. After Van Sacher-Masoch, the German nobleman, author of a book called Venus in Furs, right? And there you like to be on the receiving end. Again, I'm being crude here because actually it's a lot more
I just
complicated.
actually read one of his sexual contracts for the class that I'm teaching right now. Yeah.
Deleuze's book on that is actually good. I'm going to plug that bit of Deleuze there. A
rare Deleuze plug from Ordinary Unhappiness.
Oh, that and the Minor Languages book. If you want to,
the Kafka book.
But that's another ism, right? Here's this guy who wrote this memoir about how he signed a contract with this lady who would whip him and step on his head with a pair of high heels or whatever. Great, that's an ism. Now, it is where sexology and different sexologists, more or less simultaneously, are trying to follow through to the logical conclusion some of their most elemental and structural preoccupations. Questions about the self versus the other, sexual difference, how pleasure develops normally versus abnormally. That a bunch of figures simultaneously find themselves trying to mint another ism, reaching back into the depths of time and myth to go for another guy who they can turn into a disorder. And that's where we're about to find narcissism.
So as we get into the idea of narcissism, right, which is what we are on the quest of, after all, within these sexological discourses, I'm going to propose that we need to look at two things in particular. One, the question of auto-eroticism, right? The relation of the self to the self with regards to sexuality. Okay, so I think it's going to be really important for us to talk about that. And I'm going to suggest that we look at a particular text, which is Havelock Ellis's auto-eroticism, in order to do that. So in that realm, we're thinking about, like, in what ways do people use their own bodies for sexual pleasure? How does that play out developmentally? How does it play out among adults? In terms of behaviors, in terms of things that we see often, in terms of things that are unusual or rare, in terms of things that we never see. And then the second phenomenon or vocabulary might even be the better word that I want to draw our attention to here is what you might call orientation. And this is a word that's still in the mix. We still talk, although I feel like a little less frequently, about sexual orientation. So, how do our sexual behaviors involve the bodies of others, or how do they not involve them, right? Which takes us right back to autoeroticism. What types of bodies are we drawn to? And again, how does this play out developmentally among adults, among children, et cetera, et cetera? And to paint with a broad brush, the modern discourse of narcissism emerges when this discourse of sexology tries to tackle both of these questions at the same time and in relation to another.
I can see it already. Just hearing you say these two terms back to back, I can already see there's a kernel in the center of the two of them where I could see somebody like an Ellis starting to wring their hands as they start playing out. All right, what is autoeroticism? What is orientation? Hold on, what are you thinking about when you're grabbing your own penis?
Yeah.
What's actually going on here?
Well, because
I can already see it.
I mean,
Fellas, is it gay to touch your own
and
penis?
especially like,
Yeah, say it.
Say it.
We're behind
Okay.
the paywall.
If you're grabbing your own dick, guys, if you're grabbing your own dick, you are experiencing yourself as a self, right? At the time, maybe the hand is more associated with the self. Like, you're touching yourself with yourself, but like your external genitalia is also available to you visually as well as in terms of like the sensation. In terms of like, this is a thing, it is me, but it's also like the part of me that me is acting on. So like, it's already blurring, but I think that there's this bit where like at stake in autoeroticism is this binary distinction between self and other, which is fundamentally troubled by the simple act of autoeroticism. And as we're going to see in Ellis, this means so much more than just masturbation.
Yeah.
It's almost like there, I'll read some bits in a minute. In fact, I actually like vastly enjoyed this, reading this text in certain ways, but it's almost like autoeroticism it's like the ocean. It's like all of these places where you wouldn't expect to see it. It's there. And there's like, for example, like there's a woman who at some point like learns that she, a seemingly chaste woman, has been in an autoerotic relationship with herself, and it destroys her entire self-conception.
Before we bring Narcissus back into frame, that we know we're going in that direction. We have these two, Abby, thank you, these ingredients that you're right, autoeroticism, orientation. Maybe we start with autoeroticism because I thought I knew jerking off, and then I read Ellis, and I'm realizing how naive I have been. Like I really appreciated it. It's early on in the Ellis book. One, he mentions modern anxieties around masturbation because there is a decrease in marriages and they're worried about birth rates. And boy, people sure do seem to be masturbating a lot. And I thought that felt so modern to read. Like that's something Elon Musk would tweet. So maybe we start by talking about auto-eroticism and then we can move on to orientation after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Maybe we could even read the first paragraph of the Ellis text where he defines this and kind of already gives us a glimpse into what's going to be the problem sort of conceptually as he investigates the more narrow problem of trying to document all the forms of quote unquote erotic behavior.
I'm going to do the Abby thing. Quote. By autoeroticism, I mean the phenomena of spontaneous sexual emotion generated in the absence of an external stimulus proceeding directly or indirectly from another person. Such a definition excludes the normal sexual excitement aroused by the presence of a beloved person or the opposite sex. It also excludes the perverted sexuality associated with an attraction to a person of the same sex. It further excludes the manifold forms of erotic fetishism in which the normal focus of sexual attraction is displaced and voluptuous emotions are only aroused by some object, hair, shoes, garments, etc., which to the ordinary lover are of subordinate, though still indeed of considerable importance. The autoerotic field remains extensive. It ranges from occasional voluptuous daydreams in which the subject is entirely passive to the perpetual, unashamed efforts at sexual self-manipulation witnessed among the insane and myself. I'm just going to add that, and myself. It also includes, though chiefly as curiosities, those cases in which individuals fall in love with themselves. That makes my ears perk up.
Yep.
Among autoerotic phenomena or on the borderland, we must further include those religious sexual manifestations for an ideal object of which we may find evidence in the lives of saints and ecstatics. The typical form of autoeroticism is the occurrence of the sexual orgasm during sleep. I mean, we touch on everything here. We have people in the asylums masturbate a lot. We have people in religious contexts sure seem to masturbate a lot. People that are dreaming sure seem to be coming a lot. I don't see how anybody in the 19th century had dry pants.
Yeah,
it seems pretty like a persistent problem. Can I put it that way?
Yeah.
You may.
No, we've like, yeah, these people are wildly horny, right? Or like the question of. It's really strange because, as we may be familiar, there's robust literature like trying to medicalize the disorder of masturbation, right? You can see that we can even find, we should use one of these for episode art. Like this is the image of what the masturbator looks like, right? That you can tell by the shape of their nose or the way that they walk, right? Or again, like
they're growing hair on their palms.
Yeah, the idea that like 21st century people invented gooning is kind of interesting here. But like, no, the people were apparently masturbating too much, and that was a social problem, or at least people thought it was at this point. But Ellis also immediately blows up the problem of auto-erotism or eroticism to be more than just people manipulating themselves to orgasm, right? It is...
Although there's a lot of that.
We are familiar with quote-unquote masturbation, but that, strictly speaking, only covers a special and arbitrary subdivision of the field. Although it is true, the subdivision with which physicians and alienists have chiefly preoccupied themselves. It's very hard not to read that as like, yeah, look at these wankers wanking over masturbation. Right? But in any event, self-abuse is somewhat wider, but by no means covers the whole ground. Onanism, etc. Like, we're not just... It's not just the act that he's interested in here, or autoeroticism is not just about litigating whether masturbation is good or bad or what amount of normal isn't. But he seems to be like, what's the structure with the individual body separate from the physical presence of another body that allows for sexual pleasure? Like, how do we understand that?
He seems to get close to it. Like he's dancing around the fundamental necessity of fantasy in human life. It feels like they don't have that language for it yet.
No, you're right. Let's get granular. What are the things that he includes under autoeroticism, or like we should populate this with examples? I think that's what you want to do, right?
Sure. I mean, I've got some passages, but I will say I particularly like the pairing of Krafft-Ebing's man aroused by roses with this woman who just gets like one line. I'm not even going to quote it. It's just like, but she's just turned on by the sea. But let me just, I do think it's important here, almost as important as staying on track with these two terms, right, of auto-eroticism and orientation that are going to be very helpful in getting us where we're going. It's also important to just get the flavor of what it's like to encounter these sexologists. And Ellis is a really different animal, no beast fetish pun intended, from Krafft-Ebing. I'm not going to say that there's no moralizing tendency here. I don't think that would be true. But there is this kind of like, wow, like, look how vast, like life is a rich tapestry, right?
Yeah.
Including sexual life. So let me read a little section, which is part of my favorite, and also which gets us to some women, which we really hadn't encountered in Krafft-Ebing yet. Because we haven't really seen, the case studies that we've read so far have been confined to men. But this comes after, I'm going to say, several full pages of discussions of various things that you could insert into the vagina to masturbate with. And after what strikes me as like a very strange digression on the use of hairpins for that purpose that end up in the female bladder that surgeons have to retrieve. Okay. And this, just for folks keeping track at home, this is from 1898. All right. So this is in the section, it's kind of the post dildo section that's moving into more, how do you relate to the self through relation to objects that are already in the world? And remember, Patrick before was appealing to anthropology. You get this, like, this is that real 19th century, like, what if I just went around the globe and adduced, without necessarily any particular citations in a lot of cases, like, people in, like, women in this country are doing this. Women here are doing that. All right. So here we go. Children sometimes, even when scarcely more than infants, produce sexual excitement by friction against the corner of a chair and other pieces of furniture. Girls in France, I'm told, are fond of going on the chevaux de bois, or hobby horses, because of the sexual excitement thus aroused, and that the sexual emotions play a part in the fascination exerted by this form of amusement everywhere is indicated by the ecstatic faces of its devotees. At the temples in some parts of central India, I am told, swings are hung up in pairs, men and women swinging in these until sexually excited. During the months when the men in these districts have to be away from home, the girls put up swings to console themselves for the loss of their husbands. It is well known, and this starts my favorite part, which is the like planes, trains, automobiles. Well, actually, it's like trains, bikes, and sewing machines section. It is well known that both in men and women, the vibratory motion of a railway train frequently produces a certain degree of sexual excitement, especially when sitting forward. I'm not aware that this quality of railway traveling has ever been fostered as a sexual perversion, but the sewing machine, especially in France, has attracted considerable attention on account of its influence in exciting autoerotic manipulations. According to one French authority, it is a well-recognized fact that to work a sewing machine with the body in a certain position produces sexual excitement leading to orgasm. The occurrence of the orgasm is indicated to the observer by the machine being worked for a few seconds with uncontrollable rapidity. This sound is said to be frequently heard in large French workrooms, and it is part of the duty of the superintendents of the rooms to make girls sit properly. I'm going to skip down a little ways, but for those of you who really want to know how this happens, there's another like 2 paragraphs on the details or the mechanics of the sewing machine orgasm. Moll, I don't know who that is, remarks that he knows many married women and some unmarried who experience sexual excitement when cycling. In several cases, he has ascertained that the excitement is carried as far as complete orgasm. There's again a little more about like how this happens. And then maybe my favorite line, most medical authorities on cycling, English, French, and American, are of opinion that when cycling leads to sexual excitement, the fault lies more with the woman than with the machine. Close quote.
Let me, if I could offer something here, just like what's really striking about, the variety and spice of content here is amazing, right? And this is if you want to read, this book has fun. The book is fun. There's a lot of stuff in here like this.
You could get some ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this stuff is probably people like, oh my God, I really need to book a steamer to Yokohama or something, right? Or I got to get to the British Raj. Like you can see, like this is like
I'm going to do the Tour de France.
Peloton.
That was their whole business model.
But I kind of alongside these, like the content or the examples we're getting, the scenarios, right? The cases, the instantiations of sexuality. If we take a step back for 1 second and think about this structurally in terms of how is the phenomena or conceptual problem of sexuality itself being like structurally formulated here? But use an abstract language will be helpful for us as we proceed. Sexuality is something that an individual person can do or have with objects. And objects here, literally, it's mechanical tools, it's vehicles, it's planes, trains, automobiles, singer-sewing machines, elevators, who the fuck knows, right? Like, we're all familiar with that type of stuff. And he's going to give us lots of examples of it. Can't get into an Otis anymore. I'm not allowed legally. But even before we're exploring, documenting, or modeling interactions between multiple people or more than one person, leads us to examples in the world, but also to a conceptual model where sexuality can be a thing involving one person and an inanimate object, tool, thing outside of them that is not part of their body.
It's kind of aromantic. Like there's a function here, right?
Yeah. Solitary sex on your own cannot include an object.
Yeah.
Right? It's person and thing. But then also in the next paragraph, like, and actually there's some people who can manipulate themselves to orgasm just by like rubbing their thighs together. Or, like maybe things, so in other words, solitary sex can also be you and no thing, but like just you. So sexuality, the spice and variety of human sexuality you can be a sexual monad, right?
and still be a sexual dynamo.
very steampunk here. It's like those cranking friction thing. So keep that in mind structurally. We're going to get different accounts of objects that are much more technical and how an object relates to a subject. But here, note, the person, the problem of how the person experiences sexual pleasure. Where does sexual pleasure come from? It can be conjured with only one character involved in terms of how they relate to their world, in terms of how they relate to things that are inanimate in it, in terms of how they literally just like move their own body. It can be a solitary, singular, self-referential circuit. Now, speaking broadly here, Ellis, like other sexologists, is forced to acknowledge, cannot but acknowledge, that auto-eroticism in this way is ubiquitous. It's found outside all sorts of other cultures, right? Children do it seemingly without anyone teaching them to do it, etc. It's a thing that's all over the place. But even in this descriptive mode, you can kind of already get a sense that being a sexual monad might not be great.
So there's a worry here, I think is a way to put it, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're having such a great time as a sexual monad, or, in a monad with a really great sewing machine or bike or whatever it is, well, then why would you have any reason to have a sexual relationship with another human, right? So this really gets us into this kind of, thorny problem of like the relationship between the self and the other, and like what actually propels the self if the self is self-sustaining with respect to sexual pleasure, what propels them into relation with another and into like quote unquote more like developmentally appropriate, or to go back to the question that Dan was asking before about like, where do we get the norm or the normal from? Why, if you have your bike set up so that like, you're just like skipping church and going on that Sunday afternoon bike ride by yourself, why do you need to meet a man? What do you need him for?
If you're always getting off, why would you get off? Right? Like you're going to stay on that bike forever, right, or get caught in this kind of treadmill.
It's a closed circuit.
Yeah. And it also, alongside that possibility, that specter, basically, why would you ever leave home? Right? Like you're just there. Why not?
Schwinn, don't leave home without it.
Or at all. You've got this additional worry, and we don't need to adduce examples from this in the text, but it's here, right? Which is that pleasure of solitary sexual experience with objects or with otherwise, but like it centers you, right? Could be too much. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's also something that maybe people do it automatically, lots of kids do, but also sometimes that's a thing that you can not just get too much of on your own, but that maybe someone else is going to show you how to do. We talk like groom you into this, right? Maybe you wind up being like, oh, I love doing this. And also I love
me.
Yeah, I love me.
I love me too much.
And maybe a lot of the examples that he gives of perversions, like the person who is, I don't know, like the voyeur and who's not interacting with others, but who's just going someplace to masturbate, to look at something or to, you can wind up in a relationship where your sexuality is not just all about you and self-satisfying in this way that is in private, but that could be pathological or sexually deviant, or like the power of being able to give yourself pleasure makes you vulnerable both to like others who can like, again, pull you into something. And think about, we've already like boarding schools, gyms, showers, like people are like, well, we're really worried about kids swimming together, right? The nursery, all these spaces of modern life become places where you can wind up becoming an autoerotic, like a developmental rest fixation. They can also become pathways for your becoming some other type of deviant too. So if you don't have enough of a boundary between self and other, you can wind up getting oriented somewhere else.
I do think before we go into orientation and into the particular vocabulary that's distinctive to this field of sexology that's going to be so important for us in thinking about this, just as much as the worry is about, the swimming together or all of those kinds of like all of the kind of places that Patrick is describing where there might be, sexual deviation one way or another. I don't think we can overstate the problem of the closed circuit of the self as autoerotic object, where like the self is the lover, the self is the beloved, right? Because then you don't need anyone else. And because we are, in our journey towards, we're getting ever closer to the origins of actually this term of narcissism and something approaching what we think of it now as a clinical sense, we need to really linger with the problem of like, what if the sexual pleasure that you bring yourself is too much? Like there's too much self. There's too much you. Okay. Like this is a worry that I want people to really be able to latch onto and not forget about as we move on.
There's like having a self you can get caught in your own self, like self-satisfaction.
Yeah.
It's that perfect circuit. There's no reason to leave it.
Caught in your own self, like, I don't know, somebody staring at a reflection in a pool of water and not moving until they die, which we're not there yet. We still have this question of orientation. So I can follow. Okay, let's ladies, let's not replace men with bikes. I know men are messier, but you still need us maybe. But orientation implies that like there's a drift that society would like you to lean towards. And this goes back to that normalcy thing. There's a polite way to be sexually oriented, if I can use that word. And there's a incorrect, invalid, deviant. I mean, deviant really cuts to it, doesn't it? You can deviate from that drift and you can move into a different direction that's like less, I don't know. I'm just going to pick a random heteronormative and could produce fewer babies for the factories.
We should say here that we're using this word orientation. This is not a term that Ellis uses in anything according to modern sense, right? We all talk about, like, you can, like, maybe you got a form you have to sign, like, what's your sexual orientation, right? Or maybe that's a concern for an HR or a court to deal with, right? Because that's a thing that you can be discriminated against, a category of person, right? We're gonna get lots of categories and taxonomies via sexology, but, and this goes to exactly what you were speaking to, Dan, we're gonna think about orientation or the problem of orientation much the same way as we think about the problem of auto-eroticism. It's like you get too attracted to yourself as what's like the pull of sex, right? What is the, that kind of like
tractor beam?
Yeah, that directional kind of gravitational tug. And so when we're talking orientation, we're not using it necessarily in the modern sense, but we're also not using it in the sexological sense. We're using it as a way to understand the sexological problem and the modern sort of successor to it. Namely, it's like, okay, so if there is the possibility that you could get too oriented or too obsessed with yourself, turning inward, where might you, like, how would we want to turn you some other way? Or what are the other ways you should be turned?
Yeah, another way to put this in is sort of like, what is your desired sexual object choice?
And how do you come to need? Yeah, and their object here now, we're using in a fully psychoanalytic mode to follow the letter. But it's like, how does, well, there's that old joke, right? A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle.
Yeah, we've just discovered that women actually need bicycles more than...
Exactly. But from the sexological 19th century perspective, like, but how do women get to needing men instead of bicycles? How does nature make that happen? How do we structuralize that? How do we model that? So let's think about orientation. Let's talk about this a little bit and sort of think about the different types of orientation that are taxonomized here, and then also kind of make some broad assessments about why orientation isn't just a model or a way of thinking about stuff, but also activate some anxieties.
Let me also just, as a matter of ground clearing, say that the spatial metaphor is important here. This kind of structuring metaphor in what we were talking about here, and, you know, to get a little ahead of myself, just so people have these words in their head, what we're talking about is the language of things like perversion, the figure of the pervert. And specifically, and this is going to be very important because, you know, this is the time when the term homosexual starts getting used and thrown around. But one of the other terms that's in use, widely in use throughout these sexological discourses, is the idea of the invert. But, you know, Patrick, I was thinking about how on an episode, I think it was the one we did with Rebecca Ariel Port, we kept talking about sunflowers turning towards the sun, like being drawn. It's the tractor beam is a little heavy-handed, but like what you're drawn towards. Right? Like that is what we are talking about, is like, if you are a self and you have a thing called a sexuality, one way of thinking about in what that sexuality consists is towards what are you drawn as your sexual object. And Patrick, you can do the etymology for us. Like, what is the etymology of perversion?
Yeah, that VERS.
Yeah,
right?
that's towards.
Right. I think it was like traverse.
Yeah.
Right. Or inverted or obverse. Like it literally is a turning.
It's a spatial metaphor. Yeah. It is built into the very word.
We may even want to think about it, Abby. You're reminding me of the Dante that we read 2 episodes ago, right? Like where Dante is like, I love this woman. Or Petrarch is like, I really love this woman. And everyone, I love her. She's so great. She's so wonderful. I keep looking at her. She's beautiful, etc. But wait. What I really need to be turned towards is the sun, is God, is goodness. Like, so no, there's like that gravitational, that kind of like orientation in the sense, literally, it's like turning to face the sun as it rises, right? Or being disoriented, like not being properly, getting topsy-turvy, upside down, right?
Yeah.
It's a trajectory. It's a pathway.
And when Dan very usefully earlier has invoked the category of the normal and the abnormal, part of what is going on here in these discourses that are not as moralizing for the most part as, the actual Protestant reformers, but still have a healthy dollop of crypto-Christian morality with which they're serving up all of these categories. There is an idea that normal is being oriented towards like a pole star. So what is the pole star? What is that true north, right? And it will surprise no one that often unmarked norm is heterosexual intercourse with a member of the quote unquote opposite sex.
It's almost like there's a distinction. This isn't said explicitly in this paper or in this book. It's almost like there's a distinction between like, guys, when you masturbate, is your hand a substitute for a vagina, or are you enjoying your hand? One is a proper orientation. The other one is a deviation from that. Ladies, when you're using a foreign object to masturbate, is that object a substitution for a penis?
For your husband.
Or is the object...
Your husband.
Yeah, for a husband. Or is that object enough for you?
Not a husband.
Yeah.
Important that it be your husband.
You see what I'm saying? Like there's like a proper fixity to whatever fantasy you're having. And once you start skewing from that fantasy, whoa, hold your horses now. That's not right.
Because that's perversion.
Yeah,
right.
And Ellis does give the example, and this is where we start getting into like the rubber meeting the road, and maybe like the problem of autoeroticism actually has something to do with the problem of what the quote unquote natural or normal or non-pathological orientation is, where Ellis is like, and you know what? Actually, sometimes women who are unmarried have a really hard time, and they might even become hysterical if they don't masturbate. So suddenly. And also, like, as he says, too, like, like, how do you know what feels good for you, but also how to use your body for sex? Like, how do you know where to put this or where to take that? Like, there is this kind of thing where it's like you figure that out with yourself in order to then do it with others. When others aren't available, this is a substitute satisfaction. In fact, they're very, very interested in a very Victorian way. And like, when is situational homosexuality normal? Right? You're like, what are the, like, it's okay. What happens at Eton stays at Eton, right? Like what happens in the cloister shouldn't leave it. But so the autoeroticism and what are described here as inversions, right? You're attracted to the same sex, or like you're pervert. You're only like, it's like you're doing something other basically than reproduction with the quote unquote opposite sex, right? You're fucking a glove instead of a person, right? Or you're fucking the wrong type of person as opposed to quote unquote the opposite sex person, right? That these are all like diversions, right? Your sexuality has been turned in some way or warped even in some way that's not proper. And here's where the two binaries interact.
Can I say something real quick? Yeah. I actually did go to my old friend, the OED, for this one. The Oxford English Dictionary for this one, because I do think it's important to like literalize the ways in which the claims about morality and truth are embedded in the very term, in addition to us flagging the spatial metaphor. So perversion, the action of turning aside from what is true or right. The diversion of something from its original and proper course, state, or meaning. It's also corruption or distortion. There's a specifically theological definition, which is a change from Christian belief or truthfulness to non-Christian belief or falsity. And there it is opposed to conversion. So I think that is actually, like, if you go into the OED, that shows up as like 1A, and it's only one after that 1B, definition 1B, that gets into sexual behavior or preference that is different from the norm. But before that, there is this sense, and remember, we were talking so much on the last episode about the idea of corruption and the need for purification. We were talking about that in terms of the Roman Catholic Church, and also, probably all our individual souls. But this is here.
Yeah.
And we can certainly think about it in terms of the verse, the towards, the idea of turning towards something. But still, even though like today in 2026, You can certainly read some like psychoanalytic literature, for instance, that uses perversion as a neutral term. But that is the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah. So let's just state this again, kind of abstractly, as a level of like, what are the underlying, this is a science, right? They're not interested in vindicating God, but like, what are the underlying conceptual distinctions or like existential problems that sexology is trying to reckon with as it thinks about sexuality as like a force, as like an energy that can be directed in some ways, but also maybe can get channeled, or like you can get stuck in certain formations. Like, how does it calcify? Where does it go? How flexible is it? How brittle is it, et cetera, right? We now have this sort of these two clear things, distinctions that sexology seems to think are not just like conceptually important to preserve for its own models, but also like practically, morally, legally, and biologically necessary to kind of move through. Namely, there's a distinction between self and other. Getting too much into yourself, not good. You've got to be having sex with other people. But also, not just other people in general, but a person who is, quote unquote, the opposite of you. So now we have a binary distinction in terms of sexual difference. Now it's men and women, but we might even want to think about it in the sense of same, other. So we want to preserve self versus other, and we want to preserve the distinction between same versus other. And if you wind up being too much into the self, or you wind up being the wrong type of other, those are all perversions. Those are all biological dead ends. Those might even lead to illness, insanity, social, sanction. Even if many people are advocating for the rights of homosexuals, they're like still like, this is clearly a secondary position. This is, to use your language, Dan, which I think is very helpful, it's a substitute satisfaction. It's something you do, literally, he'll invoke the French, faute de mieux. Without better options, that's what you do. So on the one hand, that seems fairly clear. It seems straightforward. But, and we've already named this, the sexologists, as I think common sense require us to do, but the sexologists are also objective enough to have to acknowledge that, well, it seems like auto-eroticism is compatible with being properly oriented towards others. People masturbate when they're in marriage, or maybe that's how you learn how to later have sex. And thus, we suddenly have this problem, which maybe we can even articulate. It's like, here's your personal, in the level of first person thing, right? Here is your body. You are starting to inhabit this body. You're starting to understand what's painful. What is it? And something like, here's this thing that feels good. Sexual satisfaction. I can have an orgasm. It's great. But wait, you can't stop there. You've got to be attracted. You got to be doing this. The reason orgasm exists is so you can procreate and reproduce biologically. Okay, cool. So I'm going to have sex with somebody. I have to find pleasure in this other body. But the only body I'm used to having pleasure with is my own. And sure, maybe now it's a developmental leap to be like, I'm moving over to find somebody else involved. But since I've already eroticized and come to learn my own body as a type of sexual pleasure, why would I go for a body that in this framework is literally the opposite of mine? Wouldn't it make much more sense, parsimoniously, to be like, yeah, penises, I'll just speak from my own position. Penises, they're great. Love having a penis. Penises make you feel good. Hell yeah, there's another penis. That's twice the goodness. Why not just do that?
In which case, you would become what is termed at this time, an invert, to add to our litany of words that convert, pervert, invert. This is not in, active use these days, certainly. But where are you turning? Like a sunflower, where are you? What are you turning towards?
It's same. It's same.
It's same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to bring more baggage into it and say that mutual recognition of I penis good, they, them penis good. It's still a projection of the pleasure that I found in myself onto the other, which is still a love of self. I'm starting to see, that
Yes.
political 9 box where you see where you fall in the political spectrum. I'm beginning to see there's this top left corner of self and same. If you nail both of them here, oh boy, do we have a historical figure that we can use as a term for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in exactly the same the same worry, for the most part, is at work about the masturbator, who is a closed sexual circuit, and the quote unquote invert or homosexual. Those are the two words that are used at this time by the sexologists to denote what you might call same-sex object choice. It's too much of the self, right? The idea of being attracted to a person that is of the same sex is understood as not like entirely different in kind from being attracted to yourself.
To put it very succinctly, if you push these logical models, these terms, these two problems to their extreme, but also you think them alongside one another, you find yourself in the very difficult position of being like, oh, all auto-eroticism is same-sex activity.
Yes. And all same-sex activity is autoeroticism.
Well, that's where we start. That's where we get that's where it even gets messier, right?
It's complicated. Yeah.
Well, it gets much weirder, right? Like, how do I know what self is? How do I know what other is? Like, how do I come to enjoy, as a primary drive of attraction, the body that is not mine and that is radically different from mine, when my body is the one that is, so to speak, already at hand, right?
It's my template.
So this gets messy in a lot of different directions. Among other things, people may have encountered the stereotype, which we're going to encounter a lot when we talk about narcissism, that the effeminate gay man in this worldview is not only the exemplary narcissist because of their concern for their appearance and what they wear and how they sort of present, self-obsessed on the level of caring too much about their appearance to be properly masculine, but also their choice of partner, namely other men, is really them just masturbating by proxy. Their other relationships are just mirrors of them. Now, let's just flag that explicitly. That is homophobic. It's fucking
Extremely.
It's not how it actually is.
Yeah,
At the same time,
this is an attempt to give an account of the logic of the sexologists, not to affirm it.
Yeah. So like, this is clearly, that's not true, right? That's not a model that we want to fuck with. By the same token, though, sometimes you read stories, and actually I can think of a bunch of celebrities and also people I've known who have described this like personally, of like a partner paying for their partner to get plastic surgery in a way that kind of makes them look a little bit more like themselves. Right. And the same-sex others, like, it's like, whoa, this is kind of weird, right? You're maybe, again, no, our skepticisms or anxieties about what's going on in that relationship and how we feel about that relationship. There's also behind this anxiety about like self, other, is this okay? Is this not okay? How does this implicate me? Where do I stand in relation to this? But then, and here's where we're going to go with this right now. In addition to getting all these stereotypes out of this, emerging from this point where like, how do we think about autoeroticism alongside the problem of orientation? Suddenly, this is where narcissism enters. So let's get into these passages. Finally, let's get there. Who are the people who are the narcissists? What does this happen? Yeah.
Can I read the passage from Ellis?
Yeah.
Quote, to complete this summary of the main phenomena of autoerotism, I may briefly mention that tendency which is sometimes found, more especially perhaps in women, for the sexual emotions to be absorbed and often entirely lost in self-admiration. This Narcissus-like tendency, of which the normal germ in women is symbolized by the mirror, is found in minor degree in some feminine-minded men, but appears to be very rarely found in men, apart from sexual attraction for other persons, to which attraction it is, of course, normally subservient. But occasionally, in women, it appears to exist by itself, to the exclusion of any attractions for other persons. Close quote.
So here we have a woman.
Just spells it out for us.
We have a woman who is just, to use the language of the times, quote unquote, frigid. She's distant. She's uninterested in pairing, whatever.
Vanity.
Vanity.
Vanity. All is vanity.
And she's got an object a material object made by other people, but it's not a singer sewing machine. It's a mirror.
Yep.
And it gives her back herself. And she's a problem for other people around her, for the social norms, but also literally for this model. Like, here's the case of someone falling in love, to use that language is strange when you think about it, with themselves. And that's when that's the first instance of narcissism
She's a
invoked
true
in the
sexual
literature.
a true sexual monad.
Yeah. And the windows of her monad are looking at herself.
This reminds me, I have to say, this reminds me of that bit in John Berger's Ways of Seeing, where he's talking about the tradition of painting women as nudes and accusing them of vanity. And he's like, you painted something like you painted a mirror in their hand and called them vain. This
Nice.
smacks a little bit of thinking about this alongside our recent tarrying with Mary Wollstonecraft really makes me think about that. But our first Narcissus, in some way, this is our first fully female Narcissus. But she is a male creation, and I think that is very important.
And she's the concern is of effeminization, of becoming feminine or being too feminine. That's the thing that men can do too, right?
Yeah.
But it's on the one hand, we can hear echoes of Luther being like, "Don't wear those things, ladies," or the wife of Bath being like, "I'm going to goddamn well wear it if I want," and Chaucer poking fun at her for it, right? There is this kind of like anxiety about outward appearance, being like, "No, you shouldn't be putting yourself out there like that. You're too full of yourself." But there's also this kind of like conceptual existential anxiety where it's like, oh, this person seems to be perfectly fine with themselves as all they need. So Ellis in 1898, as an example of a limit case of autoerotic behavior, which is also somehow related to the dangers of inversion, and a kind of perversion too, and really makes us wonder how we get to attract with other people as opposed to ourselves, invokes Narcissus as an ism, right? Or as a potential ism. A year later, because all these sexologists...
The material for an ism is there.
Yeah.
The ism is incipient.
Yeah, we've got a new guy, the modern Narcissus, who incidentally is a woman in this first iteration.
Mm-hmm. I keep thinking about like, oh, they're just scapegoating Echo. They want the guy and they're just going to pick the woman out of it and throw it at her. Oh, well.
A lot of
They
psychiatry,
put a
like
mirror
religion,
in her
making up a guy
hand
to
and
get mad
accuse
about,
her
yeah.
of vanity, Dan.
Yeah, I know.
And she's the one doing too much looking at herself. It's not us looking at her that's the problem.
Yeah,
Right?
certainly not.
But also we can't look away. The other example is by now this is, I think it's sort of a 1-2 punch that leads narcissism to become a term in the 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th century literature. And that's where then Freud will get to it. And when Freud gets to it, as we'll see, it's not even really going to be necessarily about the sexological. It's going to be about like that structural idea of orientation towards self. I think a very structural level, though also the sex is going to be there too.
Okay, so tell us about this text, because this is the only one I wasn't familiar with before we started doing the research for this episode.
Yeah, so there's a very long book, which is even more of like a taxonomy listing of numbers by a German psychiatrist named Nake. And he's working with populations of people who are confined in asylums.
Naka.
Good for him either way. But he's working with people in asylums. Right. And he's literally trying to, this is a subject population you could do statistical methodology to, like, this is when they do this, like, and whether out of compulsion or for want of anything better to do, or as a way to say fuck you to the people who are confining them. A lot of these people just masturbate publicly in front of their captors or whatever. Right. Now he lists all these. He's like, who also sometimes they have sex with each other. Statistically, how many of them have sex with men who are men? How many, like, he starts going through all the paces of this. He's in dialogue with Ellis, and Ellis too, incidentally, who was signaled he's already read Freud on hysteria. So Freud as a person who's interested in the sex is someone who's already in the water here, so to speak. Naka describes a certain limited number of people, several men and one woman, who he describes as being Narcissus-like, or even, and here's where we get the German ism properly, it's narcissism.
Narcissismus.
Yeah. And what they do is, well, the men apparently stand in front of mirrors and masturbate while looking at themselves. And the woman, she's into herself sexually. She seems to be her own.
She kisses her own arm and her hand, and she looks really into it. That's kind of what's going on with her. Here it is in the German. Sie küsst sich nämlich wenn sie im Stürme ist, die Arme und die Hand und sieht dabei ganz verliebt aus. So like she's in her storm. That's like it's there in the German, but she's kissing her own arms and her hand, and she looks like enamored when she's doing this. But yeah, it's the in her storm part that kind of sticks with me. Sorry for my execrable German pronunciation.
There's something going on here that we should say, like, and also like the other example too that he gives. I'll just read this bit. I'll give it to you in the English that I'm rendering. These are 4 men. 3 stand very often before the mirror, contemplating themselves with satisfaction or complacency. They are, one accepted, exceedingly vain of their person. So there's a moral kind of fixation here, which they deck out to the best of their power. So they're confined, but they're trying to dress themselves as best as possible. One, however, and now note, it's not pleasure per se. It's something else. It's not even really masturbating too. It's one tears out every gray hair or has them removed. A fourth speaks very often of his beautiful person, although he has no grounds whatsoever for it. Jesus. Man.
Love that. Good shade.
These manifestations apparently pass beyond ordinary vanity, but he's a little uncertain about the sexual component of it. It's when we get to that woman, though, in her storm, and the language, it's what's the German gloss here? It's the, like an acute psychotic episode, right? Which is more idiomatic than it is at the time, a medical term. She takes herself as an erotic object. And it's worth noting here what she specifically does, insofar as that my understanding from the sexological literature is that this is actually comparatively rare, is that she kisses herself. But sit with that for a second. It's the kissing of the self.
She's kissing her arms,
her hands. Yeah.
Her hands.
So she is a sexual partner, and it seems more romantic than the like auto-eroticism that we were getting from Ellis.
Yeah, and more than the patients that Patrick was describing who are like tearing out gray hairs, like, because that feels more of a sort of like, I don't know, a different kind of vanity, like the kind of like, oh, okay, like, I'm just gonna try to. You're in an asylum and you're like, I'm going to try to make myself look a little bit like younger and I don't know.
I feel like that like excessive grooming is feels a little bit more other oriented in a way that is very much about the self, whereas the being alone in your room making out with your own forearms feels it feels a little different, a little bit more intense.
It's very
like
teenage
a concentrate.
Girl. To me, this is maybe one of those things that like you all just like kind of missed, but like that's like teenage girls like trying to be like, well, how do you learn how to kiss someone? Just kiss your own arm.
Yeah. I was giving that advice too. Yeah.
Yep.
It's not a common adult sexual activity though. That's the
because eventually you get away from your own. The arm is for practice.
Exactly right. And also like, no, let's go back for a second to our earlier distinction and just reprise this between like what's at the core of autoeroticism, self or other, right? And instead of you're going to be using an object, your relationship to yourself is mediated by this little object, the singer-song machine or the dildo or whatever. And to some extent, like there's an instrumentality, like you're just using your hands, right? Like there's some distinction between like, well, this is the part of me that's the genitals, this is for the sexual stuff, right? The other stuff, like you don't need to do foreplay with yourself. You go right to the main business. Here, though, is a person who is, the mediation is her own body and her object is her own body. Yeah. And she's not bringing herself to completion mechanistically. She is luxuriating in like adoring herself. Yeah. It is a 2 lips touching, except it's her own lips touching her own arm.
She's pleased with herself also. I mean, I feel like she's self-contained.
So to bring us full arc, I'm just trying my best. I knew going into this series that like the modern conception of narcissism was complicated. Over-determined to be a Patrick.
Patrick doesn't own that word.
I know. I relate it to Patrick though. Patrick is over-determined.
Why own over-determination coin? Which
I knew it was complicated. So we started back. At first, it was this Greek story of a young man who gets lost in his own image, prefers his own image to any other partnership. And there were like shades of character flaw, or like he's sick and he doesn't realize it. Like he has that moment where he realizes, oh no, it's me. And like that revelation kind of kills him, yada, yada. Then we go on to the Protestants, where this self-love is a distraction and maybe even a sin, because why would you love yourself when it's God that you should love? God loves you enough. You don't need any more. You should be turning to him. And it's this like moralizing thing. And now from the sexologists, we're coming up on this question of orientation, perversion, love objects, and all of these things have like mechanical causes. Like they're coming up with these frameworks to try to come up with some kind of causal chain for like, okay, we see this as a phenomenon. What is causing it? And it seems to be something to do, like you're saying, with this self, other, self, same kind of distinctions. I'm trying to wrap my head around. So narcissism, so far, narcissism seems to be something about self as it relates to others, and not just others as in like an immediate romantic partner or rejection of a romantic partner, but others in like the big other sense.
Yep.
Self versus a rejection of some preset path that you're meant to be traveling down. I'm beginning to see the narcissism, modern narcissism, like starting to come into focus. And I have this like little anxiety, guys, I'm going to be a little transparent here. I have this little anxiety. Patrick, I think you've alluded to it. I'm beginning to wonder if even asking these questions about narcissism isn't a little narcissistic.
I think that recursive meta turn, that kind of anxiety of the anxiety of talking about narcissism and whether or not that is itself narcissistic.
Yeah.
I think that's never going to go away.
Okay.
But that also speaks to the core thing that's happening here, right? We in the 21st century have a way of thinking about narcissism as, on the one hand, it's a practical problem, it's other people, but also it names a discrete thing. It's an answer. Why is this fucker behaving this way? They're a narcissist. Why did they leave me? Well, they were a narcissist, etc. Right? However, I think where we are now, and we're going to go definitely with Freud next time we do this, is it's much better to think about narcissism as naming a question. The figure of Narcissus comes back onto the stage in modernity, gets summoned up from the past with all these other associations, even as we're trying to do scientific description and think about development neutrally and help people and, you know, become more like cognizant and tolerant towards the wild sort of expressions of human sexuality. Narcissus emerges at the point at which our anxieties about the distinction between self and other, between proper sexual orientation and deviant sexual orientation, break down. Right? Narcissus enters or comes back at some point at which we have to look at the self again and model what is or isn't or should or shouldn't be the case with the self and how it relates to pleasure and gender, etc. It comes back when that question feels most acute, and when the models of the people who are trying to be as objective and scientific and non-moralizing and non-religious as possible find themselves in a point of contradiction that is also clearly an anxiety for them.
This has been an episode of Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. I'm Abby Kluchin, and today I was joined by Patrick Blanchfield and Dan Yowell. This podcast is produced by Dan Yowell. Theme music by Formal Chicken.